We all have a deep sense of unease. Something is going very, very wrong with the country that we're part of, with the country that we believe in, with the country we want our kids and grandkids to grow up in. We have spent time indoctrinating a younger generation that everything about our past is wrong. We've been poisoning the minds of our young people. That, I think, is absolutely appalling. I want them to learn that whilst not everything in our history is perfect, actually, there is no country in the world with a better past than us, and we should be proud of those that went before us. There is a growing deep sense of unease about crime on our streets. The fact, it doesn't matter where you are, you can be in the poorest part of the country or the richest part of West London. The number of young people out there now threatening people, stealing mobile phones and carrying knives makes us all, wherever we live, think twice, doesn't it? About going out in the evening. And I'm aiming this particularly to young people. And by the way, one thing they can't understand is the extent to which I am connecting with the younger generation. It's very, very exciting. Whether that's a result of having snakes crawling all over me in the jungle or not, I don't know. But I do have the most active TikTok of any British political figure by miles, and I sense the younger coming. But it's interesting. You think, well, fear of crime is when you get older. No. It's the younger people that now fear crime more than the middle-aged and the elderly, because they want to go to music concerts. They want to go out clubbing. Something for which the North East is world-renowned, incidentally. And they're deeply fearful that other young people are carrying knives. So there's a sense of unease about that. And the answer, of course, to that is a completely different, less woke approach to policing. And we should be executing stop and search, stop and search, stop and search. And perhaps there's an even deeper sense of unease about what is happening in our communities. We have always been, particularly compared to our continental neighbours, the most open country when it comes to our relationship with the rest of the world. Think of this part of England. Think of the ships that were built, the men and women that went all over the world, and in turn, people from other parts of the world that came here. And we're the only country in the history of humankind who has developed a relationship with its empire into one of a club that is called the Commonwealth. These things are remarkable achievements. And we've always been, I think as a people, far more generous and far more open-hearted to those around the world facing genuine oppression or the threat perhaps even of death. So we've always been kind to those communities in trouble around the world. We've accepted, absolutely, since the late 1940s, that immigration into Britain can be a good thing. Certainly the choice of food in most of our towns is rather better as a result of it. But what has happened over the course of the last 25 years is something entirely different. It is mass migration on a level that in fact begins not just to divide and damage communities and potentially to set people apart from each other, which is dangerous, but also I think a feeling that perhaps something about our culture is directly under threat. that sense of who we are, and that this is a problem. And just think about the numbers. You know, Tony Blair came to power. Sedgefield boy, of course, it's all your fault up here, it really is. Tony Blair comes to power and opens the door. And bear in mind, for the previous 50 years, net migration had been 30, 40,000 a year. That's what it had been for 50 years. Tony Blair comes to power and opens the door. And net, over his premiership, 2.7 million people come. And the Conservatives accelerate it, because now nearly 4.5 million have come since they came to power. Now, you are suffering less with this problem in the northeast than certainly the southeast, where I'm from, where the roads are clogged beyond imagination. Access to a GP is pretty much impossible at short notice. And housing has become, for most young people, simply an unobtainable dream. And rents are up by 20 to 30% across the country in the last 4 years. It's a simple demand-supply equation. And that's why I've said from the start, this really should be the immigration election. I don't know whether you watched the debate last night between, no, you had better things to do, I can't say that I blame you. But if you did watch the debate last night, furious arguments on tax, furious arguments on immigration, furious arguments on the Channel boat crossings, a subject that I will return to, I promise you, it's my specialist subject. Furious arguments between them, and yet, in policy terms, there isn't really much to choose. In fact, the more they argued, the more they seemed the same. Has your phone stopped ringing? I'm so sorry to inconvenience you, I really, really am. Don't worry about it, I don't mean it. And so, we have a sense things are going wrong. And by the way, if you're self-employed out there, or running a small limited company, you know what I'm about to say, that neither front bench has any comprehension of who you are or what you do. None. But does the Labour Party offer any solutions? Well, to begin with the Conservatives, and it's worth saying here in the northeast, of course, Sunderland, I'll never forget Sunderland, and the early hours of June the 24th, 2016, when I was feeling utterly depressed. The polls had closed. It was the end of a 25-year journey for me, because I'd just gone on relentlessly believing that the best people to govern Britain were the British people themselves. That was what I fought for all those years. And I was feeling really depressed. The polls had closed, there was nothing more I could do, and then up came the Sunderland result. And we realised then that we could win. And I've been back in Sunderland many times since, but I was here in 2019 when Theresa May was messing around, not keeping her promise, and we launched the March to Leave. And they marched from Sunderland to London to get into Parliament Square, and it was the day after that that I launched the Brexit Party. And I was in this very hall in 2019 with the redoubtable Anne Widdecombe. And we won the European elections. We got rid of the useless Mrs. May, which was a good scalp, I can tell you. One of the most useless prime ministers of modern times, although there is fierce competition. But of all the regions of the United Kingdom, where did we get the highest result? Here in the northeast of England. Because not only are you the friendliest people in the country, and it's absolutely true. In fact, you go out in the northeast to buy a newspaper, the whole experience might take 45 to 50 minutes. In London, they won't give you a second glance, but here, you're telling me a whole life story, don't you? But it's also, I think, probably the most patriotic part of the country. You believe in Britain, you believe in England. So when I very generously stood down against Boris Johnson and 320 seats, an announcement that I made in Hartlepool, and it gave Boris an open door and helped him get the biggest majority of modern times. But you all know we voted Brexit to take back control of our borders, to reduce the numbers of people coming into Britain. And frankly, what they've done is nothing less than a complete betrayal of the Brexit vote and of that vote in 2019. And as for the small boats, well, it was me going out into the English Channel repeatedly in the spring of 2020, filming, explaining that unless we got a grip on this, there'd be a huge problem. And I dared to use a word so repulsive that it must never be repeated in polite society. A word so awful that I'm to be a pariah for the rest of my life. I dared to say that I feared there would be an invasion of small boats across the English Channel. Well, now, 4,000 boats and 128,000 people later, if it's not an invasion, what the hell is it? And nearly all young men, many coming from war zones in which they were directly fighting. Many coming from countries where gang culture is the norm. Many coming from countries that are rife with terrorism. And most coming from countries in which women are not even treated as second-class citizens. And I've said that this should be a national security emergency. Now, funny enough, the only reason Boris started talking about the Rwanda plan was fear of me. And the same goes now for Sunak. He says the planes would have gone to Rwanda in July. He told us that people were already in detention waiting to go on those flights. What he didn't tell us last night was that every single one of those people that's been detained has now been released on bail using human rights laws, and many have absconded and disappeared into the community. And blow me down if Keir Starmer, in one of those rare moments last week when he appeared to be awake, Keir Starmer said we should call it a national security emergency. So they all use now the language that I've been using, but they've no intention of doing a damn thing about it. For Labour, it's not even in their key 6 priorities. It doesn't mention legal or illegal immigration in any way at all. So I, having fought so hard to try to achieve that historic moment when we got back our independence and self-government, I was more than happy on the 1st of February 2020, once we were out, to say, I will pursue a different future. I'll pursue a different career. After all I'd done over 20 years in the European Parliament, an experience that I enjoyed far more than they did. And so for 4 years, I've been busy broadcasting, helping GB News get up and running and off the ground, which I've been proud to do. I've been much in demand in America, speaking at universities and all sorts of business events. And life's been really good. Life has been really good. I've not had the abuse. I've not had the pressure. I've not had the 18, 20-hour days. And I've earned good money. And guess what? I've just given it all up to come back and lead you, all right? Thank you. Now, there are some who think that maybe I need my bumps felt. But I tell you what, I sense something is happening out there. I sense this unease that I talked about earlier is being widely felt, and that no one sees solutions coming from the Labour or the Conservative parties. I also sense what people want is not just the kind of politics you get when you put Penny Mordaunt and Angela Rayner together in a TV debate, which descends into a catfight. Oh, look at them. They're even worse than us. Well, that's what it is, isn't it? I think what people want is some sense of a vision and some courageous leadership to say, this is where we need to go, this is what we want to do. And I honestly believe when it comes to business, and I've touched on small business already, I know the North East has a much higher ratio of small and medium-sized businesses than anywhere else in the country. We understand business. We know that the VAT threshold is far too low. We know that the IR35 rules make life for those that are self-employed, frankly, damn near impossible in some industries. We know that corporation tax going up by 30%. That's what they put it up by last year. 30% is bad for reinvestment in business. So we're on the side, genuinely on the side, not just of half a dozen big multinationals who take MPs out to smart restaurants in London and then they think they understand what business is. We're on the side of men and women prepared to go out there, take a risk, set up their own businesses and create wealth for themselves and for this country. And talking of business, with us today in the audience is a North East businessman you might have heard of. Now, all of you here who support Sunderland Football Club, yeah, I know, calm down. I'm going to ask you to put football rivalries aside for a moment. I'm delighted that joining us today, supporting us, giving us a donation after decades of publicly supporting the Conservatives, somebody who's been a phenomenal, amazing success story, indeed role model for people in the North East. With us today, supporting us, with us now, is Sir John Hall. Thank you. He's at the back there, he's waving. Give him a wave, everybody. John, thank you for coming out so publicly for us. And I promise you, this is the first time ever that a crowd in Sunderland have stood up and cheered you. And it's a very appropriate moment. But what about workers? What about tax? What about income? And what about benefits? Now, the numbers claiming benefit have gone through the roof, especially since the pandemic. And by the way, just quickly on that pandemic, the Tories say we're in economic trouble because of the pandemic. But hang on, you didn't need to lock us down for a second and a third time. You didn't need to take away our freedoms in a way that weren't even done during World War II, and all of it with Labour support. I actually believe the long-term economic and psychological damage from lockdowns 2 and 3 represents the biggest mistake any British government supported by the opposition has ever made in peacetime. I don't know about the Downing Street parties. I treated those last 2 lockdowns, I must be honest, with total contempt. No, I'm sorry. I just thought government's gone way, way too far. Way, way too far. But on tax, back to tax. This is our big, bold proposal. Yes, there are many that have gone on to benefits that should not be on benefits. The idea that on a Zoom consultation, you say, "Hi doc, not feeling too good today, little bit depressed. Oh, well, you better go on the unemployment register as disabled." I'm sorry, this approach is wrong, and it's psychologically even more damaging for most of those who have something of a problem already. And by the way, I'm not talking about those that are severely mentally disabled. I'm not talking about those severely physically disabled. We are a civilized society. We will always help and carry our weakest. Always. But there are many in that situation who would rather not be there. But they're trapped. They're trapped because if you're on benefits and you go to work and you work for more than 16 hours a week, you start to lose your benefits. You're therefore better off not working. You're better off staying on benefits. What kind of lunacy is that? So positive solutions. Raise the level at which people start paying tax to £20,000 a year. And then not only do people come off benefits and go back to work because it's better for them financially, it'll also be better for them psychologically as well. That's the kind of thing we're going to fight for. We're going to fight for our schools and our universities to go back to critical thinking, to make sure young people hear both sides of an argument, not a level of indoctrination. We will fight for net migration. Of course people can come. Of course people can go. But we'll fight for net migration to get to zero, to give us a chance to catch up with the massive backlog in health and housing in this country. And we will fight to recognise the only way we're going to stop these young men crossing the English Channel in vast numbers is by leaving a court that has now gone way beyond its original purpose to leave the ECHR. We must get back control of our borders. That is what we voted for again and again and again. And on net zero, who's paying the price? Who's paying the price? And by the way, once again, there's almost no difference between the parties. It's the Conservatives following Tony Blair that have gone down the net zero route. Legislation passed at the end of Mrs May's term with virtually no debate in Parliament whatsoever. It is the single most expensive piece of legislation ever passed outside of going to war. It was done, of course, with no opposition from Labour, because on the big stuff, they all agree on everything. Now look, we understand the world has a problem. We understand there are now 8 billion people living within it. We understand that Indonesia alone has 250 gigantic coal-fired power stations. We understand that China builds 80 new coal-fired power stations every year. We understand that in India, where Mr. Modi has been re-elected as Prime Minister, that one of his boasts was that for the first time this year, China will produce and burn 1 billion tons of coal. Just try and get your head around that. Numbers that are, I mean, even for a former coal mining area, these are numbers that are simply unbelievable. And we understand that we are less than 1% of global CO2 production. But to build and rely on intermittent wind energy is expensive. Yes, it might create some jobs on land, but it's expensive. And we understand none of this works without you ultimately picking up the bill which they add to your electricity. And frankly, to decarbonise the grid by 2030 as Labour want to do, or 2035 as the Conservatives want to do, is not only a practical impossibility, but we simply can't afford it. So what we say is scrap the crazy net zero rules, get rid of them. Get rid of them. And does that mean we're irresponsible? Well, look, what was the good? What was the good of Redcar, the steelworks, closing in 2015? What was the good of that? Oh, government loved it. It meant our total CO2 emissions were down. But what happened to that plant? Do you know? It went to India. So the steel that was being produced in Redcar is now being produced in India, and the steel shipped back to us for us to use. We haven't reduced carbon dioxide emissions globally. We've exported the production of CO2 to the detriment of all those families in Redcar. And the same applies to oil and gas. Rishi, we as the Conservatives support the North Sea industry. No, you don't. You've put 75% super taxes, and Chevron have pulled out of the North Sea after 60 years. Even those that are most concerned about climate change accept we'll be using oil and gas up until 2050. So we say, let's make our own steel, let's produce our own gas, let's produce our own oil, let's give people jobs. Whilst at the same time going for small modular nuclear reactors which give us regular energy, regular baseload energy, and produce no carbon dioxide whatsoever. So we're thinking and offering solutions. Now there's been some talk of foreign policy over the last few days, and I have been very, very deliberately and willfully misquoted by one or two leading newspapers. All I did was to warn. All I did alone was to predict what would happen. That is not a sin. Because equally, unlike Labour or Conservatives, I said on day one of the Iraq war, what is your long-term goal? What is your exit strategy? And do you know what? They never, ever had one. And on Libya, in 2012, when Cameron decides to go to war against Libya, with full support from the Labour Party, I was the one saying this is madness, total madness. And you know, before the Libyan war, ISIS didn't even exist. We helped create ISIS. We are absolutely idiotic when it comes to these things. And there were no small boats crossing the Mediterranean before the Libyan war with the knock-on here. Our foreign policy, not even to mention the appeasement of Iran, who fund Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis and so much of what is going wrong in the Middle East. I would put myself up on foreign policy against any of these people. I have got the track record of being right. Now, I've laid out some of the things that we stand for. I've laid out some of the positive vision that I think we need for the future. Now, we're up against the Conservative Party, or should I perhaps more accurately describe them as an international betting consortium. Gets worse every day, doesn't it? Story after story. I mean, now we learn of a Conservative MP who allegedly has put £8,000 on his Labour opponent in his own seat to win. I mean, would you bet against your own team at football? Well, if you were caught, you'd be kicked out of the club, and quite right too. More and more of them are being dragged in, and it shows you their sense of arrogance and entitlement. And the truth of it is, the Conservatives deserve to lose this election, but Labour don't deserve to win. Here in the northeast, and in particular in Sunderland, as we heard earlier, in this part of this country, Reform UK is now second to Labour in every single constituency, with the Conservatives trailing in third. A Conservative vote in the northeast is a vote for Labour. A Conservative vote in the northeast is a wasted vote. We are the challengers, and I want Conservative voters who feel that Brexit's been betrayed, that after 14 years they deserve to lose this election, to switch their support to us. But here's the important thing. A lot of people are saying Labour because they've gone back to where they were before. A lot of these people in the intervening years had voted UKIP or Brexit Party. They're saying Labour. But look, Starmer won't stop the boats. Mass immigration will continue. He'll take us closer back to the European Union. He's already said he wants to join the European Defence Union, which would take us further away from NATO and America, and in a dangerous world, that is just about the last thing we should even be contemplating. Goodness knows what will happen under Starmer to our schools and some of the madder ends of trans ideology. I mean, after all, Starmer himself can't even tell you what a woman is. I mean, I don't know. Some people think a woman can have a penis. I'm just not one of them, are you? Your vote isn't going to change this result. We know the result already. Labour have won. The question is, who can stand up and be a genuine voice of opposition? And I don't just mean in Parliament, I mean across the country. As we proved with the Leave the EU campaign, you can be mighty effective when you organise yourself into groups, town by town, and are prepared to work. And I called it the People's Army, and we beat the establishment. Well, we now face an even bigger and tougher job. Be in no doubt, every single vote for reform and every single elected reform member is going to be the voice of opposition for the next 5 years. And I urge people, vote with your heart. Vote for what you believe in. Don't vote for one of the other two because you think they're less bad than the other lot. Do something positive. And with me, you'll get a leader, whether you like me or not, you'll get a leader who is consistent, a leader who doesn't change, a leader who's got principles, a leader who is unafraid to tell the truth, even if it's unpopular at a certain moment in time. So, I must end, because I can tell you're getting very, very bored with me.